Welcome. Do you have what it takes to analyze tales from the Scrum? Well, hey there, Dr. Tom here. Welcome to Scrum Horror Stories. Okay, I admit, I oversold that a little bit, but you gotta admit, that intro is pretty funny. Hey, at any rate, here's the deal. It's not that these are horror stories and software zombies will be walking the cubicles in your company. But I talk to a lot of people. I talk to people where I work now. I talk to people where I used to work. I talk to people, stay in touch with people who worked where I work now and have left. I speak to a lot of industry conferences, and I talk to people afterwards. And the thing about it is, I just keep hearing the same story. And the real truth of the matter is the reason these stories resonate is because I've made the same mistake. So what I want to do is just talk about some Scrum mistakes that I see repeatedly. And for those who don't know me, let's be clear on something. This is not Scrum bashing. I love Scrum. I've been using it nonstop since 2004. I'm a certified Scrum Master, certified product owner, certified agile estimator. All my certifications are from my cone. So I love Scrum, but just as I talk to person after person, I keep hearing the same story. So in today's video, the story that I want to talk about is some version of this. We're using Scrum, so we don't plan. No, you don't understand. We're using Scrum, we don't spend time planning. No, we wouldn't plan. That's Waterfall. See, these are all the same question. And it's this idea that because we use Scrum, we've been given a hall pass. We don't have to plan. And let's be clear on this. That's crazy town. There's always benefit to planning. As a rule, very often more planning means a better outcome. Now, not always. You can go overboard, and I'll tell you a crazy example of that in a second. But to be clear, with Scrum, we still want to plan. And what Scrum does is it doesn't tell us, oh, don't plan. It gives us a better way to plan. So when I was at Parker Hannifin last as a contractor, I got to work on F-35. Now, if you're not familiar with F-35, it's the U.S. military's most recent jet fighter. The idea was for it to be a low-cost fighter, primarily through the idea that, over the years, the Navy buys one kind of plane and the Air Force buys another kind of plane. And, people are saying, well, if everybody bought the same airplane, we could save some real money here on in terms of just economy of scale, as well as, if a Navy airplane has to make an emergency landing at an Air Force base, they don't have the right replacement parts. And so there's this idea that if we got everybody on the same aircraft, that'd be good. And then the other part of it was we're going to use the best, most advanced planning methods to really drive the cost down. And, the idea was to, if we do this, the F-35 will be less expensive than the F-16, and this will just be the most wonderful airplane ever. Now, how that's turned out is it's one of the largest cost overruns in the history of the United States military. The last figure I saw, and this is a couple of years ago, so I'm pretty sure this is out of date. It's a bigger number now. But last I heard, the program was about $200 billion with a B dollars over budget, and they're having all kinds of quality problems, and there's just no end to the problems. Now, the reason for that is complicated. There's a lot of factors, one of which I got to experience myself. So early in the program, I was working at Parker Aerospace, and the people from Lockheed came in, so they're the prime contractors, and they explained to us how this is going to be the most well-run program in the history of military aviation. And they said, you're familiar with the idea of milestones. In planning, we set milestones. And they explained to us, on this aircraft, we're going to do inch stones. Inches, not a mile. 5,280 feet, we're going to do inches, 1/12 of a foot. And we proceeded to do this process where we tried to plan what we'll be doing every day, each and every day for the next, I forget if it was 18 months or 2 years or whatever it was. But the idea was more planning is always better. Now, at the time, it was pretty obvious to us that was crazy. I think the program's shown that how terrible of an idea that is. And the important thing to understand with regard to Scrum is Scrum was born as kind of a backlash to that kind of thinking. And the thinking is, if spending 20 hours planning is a good idea, then spending 40 hours planning is a better idea. The idea is just the more control, the more planning, the more neurosis, the better the outcome. Now, to be clear, Scrum militantly opposes that idea. But Scrum still calls for planning, and we plan different, and I would say we plan better. So to understand that, let's consider two things. So first of all, with Scrum, what you do is think about it if you're going to drive your car from San Diego to New York. Basically you're going to come up with a plan like this. Okay, so let's plan on getting to Albuquerque on the first day. Let's plan on getting to Wichita on the second day. Let's plan on getting to Indianapolis on the third day, and let's plan on getting to New York on the fourth day. Now, even to come up with those 4 cities, for this example, I was thinking what are the, I had to get out a map and a ruler and kind of what's, kind of a reasonable city and where are the highways. That actually took real planning to come up with those 4 steps. That was not arbitrary. It was not intuitively obvious. And once I went through that process, I feel like, if you want to get to New York in 4 days, that's, probably the right way to do it. So one thing is Scrum has what's called a release plan. And what you want to do is you want to have that level of plan. You want to think about where are we going to be over time. That is absolutely planning. Now, here's the difference between Scrum and Waterfall. With a Waterfall approach, we would then say, okay, gang, we're going to drive. Let's plan every right turn and every left turn between here and New York. Let's plan every potty break. Let's plan every place we're going to eat. Let's plan every place we're going to stop for a little bit of sightseeing. Let's plan everything in as much detail as possible. Now, the idea of Scrum is, let's plan how to get to Albuquerque. We're going there first, bust out the map, and let's have a plan. So on the night before the first day or the morning of the first day, we're going to plan. We're going to plan from getting from San Diego to Albuquerque. There will be a plan. There will be quite a bit of detail. But here's the thing. Let's say you're doing it in winter. After the first day, sometime during the first day of the trip, there may be a major snowstorm between Albuquerque and Wichita, and you realize, hey, we need to kind of take a different route. Let's do something further south. So the idea is you postpone the extreme detail until the last minute. And the idea is if you end up not going from Wichita to Indianapolis because of some reason you had to take a different route, and that reason may have occurred during the trip, then all that time you spent planning getting from Wichita to Indianapolis is wasted effort. So we do have a plan. We do think about the big plan. Now, in Scrum, what you also do is you have a backlog. And here's where I think the question, the confusion comes in. You say, well, each sprint, what we do is we sit with the product owner and very, stakeholders and whatever and say, okay, we've got all these things on our backlog and what are the highest priorities, and we'll work on those. And so the people who think, well, we don't plan with Scrum, they say, well, every time it could, there could be a pivot. You could say, well, the competitors did something unexpected. We have to react to it, or, some unforeseen thing. So we don't really plan. We're always just sort of rolling with it. And here's the mistake. It is true that the release planning may get disrupted. But the idea is there's value in thinking it through at the highest level. Now, that is not as much wasted effort as going through and having a, Microsoft project and planning every day for the next 18 months. But you really have thought about it. And what that does is that positions you, first of all, you have a plan, you kind of know where you're going. And second of all, it forced you to think through things. So then if somebody says, oh, our competitor announced a feature that does this, you've already done a lot of thinking about how things interrelate, what depends on what, and you're better able to pivot. So the idea that we work from a backlog does not in any way undermine this idea that we always have a release plan. We always know where we're going. Now, the second thing is with Scrum, one thing that's better is rather than saying, well, if we want to do more planning, spend the time on the timeline, spend the time breaking up, well, by lunch we ought to be to here, by dinner we ought to be there. Instead, spend your time understanding the features. So you have things in the backlog. In every sprint, you should be grooming your backlog. And that's your planning. You're understanding the features we're going to be doing in the future. And as you're working on related features, you're better able to understand these features. See, with Waterfall, the premise is you can understand every feature right up front. And that it just is nonsense. The further you get into this thing, you have a better understanding of the real requirements and how this thing needs to work and so on. So we are planning, but we're not focusing our planning on the timeline. We're focusing our planning on decomposing the requirements and on really understanding it. So every single sprint should have time grooming the backlog. So we constantly have an approximate idea where we're going. So we always have the sense on day 1, get to Albuquerque. On day 2, get to Wichita. On day 3, get to Indianapolis. And on day 4, we arrive in New York. And then if that changes, we all have the idea of what the new thing is. We're not going to Wichita, we're going to Atlanta or something. And we have everyone on the team involved with that. So everybody has this idea. So again, another difference is timelines, the detailed waterfall is not imposed by some program manager who's walking around with a printout from Microsoft project. The idea is everybody's been participating, everybody understands, everybody makes the contributions to help us realize what's doable and what's not. So Scrum involves a lot of planning and not quite as much as F-35. I mean, that's just simply crazy town. But, to think we don't plan with Scrum is to really misunderstand Scrum. And let's say it again. We always want to plan. Planning is always good. Hey, at any rate, I'm Dr. Tom. Thanks for listening. Can you give me a like? Can you maybe subscribe? Give me a little comment? I'll answer your question. And if you'd like to see me tackle another topic on Scrum-related topic, put it down there. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.